this is kind of hard for me, I think. But I asked to be involved, and Father Marty was kind enough to allow me to be involved. And I chose these readings tonight because of the time that we're in, this being Good Friday, tomorrow Holy Saturday, and then Easter Sunday. It seems of any time to die, this is a kind of a special week in which for that to happen. Because as family, we can kind of really appreciate and understand the sorrow of a Good Friday, the losing of a loved one. And through our prayers and through our support of brothers and sisters and family and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, friends and neighbors, everybody coming together to support one another. All of these things somehow might help us to get through these next few days. But especially the fact of the day that it is today and Sunday that is coming. The sadness of Good Friday. The sadness of losing somebody that's special to us. But then as through the readings and through the prayer and the support of others, we know that there's something more important. There's the resurrection. And as a Christian community, we can look forward to this Sunday as Easter and the glorious resurrection of Jesus. But it gives us hope and an understanding that we will all, at some point in time, pass through this same stage. It's inevitable, but the opportunity is there for us for the resurrection. To join Dad, to join his parents and his brothers and sisters that have gone on before him, and our friends and relatives and neighbors who've gone before us. That we can enjoy our company again one day with Christ. It's been a time for us to come together, this time of sorrow and sadness. We all need that. We need to grieve. We need to remember the good times. We need to remember the times that we've gotten together as family and friends when it wasn't somebody's funeral, or it wasn't somebody's wake service. And we've all got memories like that. When you came tonight and when I came today, I didn't know what to expect. But there's been a lot of laughing. There's been a lot of fun, a lot of reminiscing of the good times. Talking to cousins that I hadn't seen in years. Trying to remember, now who's that? But a lot of people have said they remembered Dad for his memory. Carl, you said that too, and other people have said that. And I remember Dad talking about the times on the farm and having fun with his brothers and his sisters. He passed on a lot to us. He shared the fun times. We used to laugh a lot around the house, as you guys did too. But it's been a special time. It's a special honor for me to be up here trying to reminisce or relate the scriptures that we talked about my father. But that's what we're about. There's something greater than this. There's something for us to live for. There's a faith that we need to demonstrate in our daily lives. There's a joy of life, and there's an opportunity to enjoy it together with everyone else some date in the future. And if we're here today, to pay our respects, we're here also to celebrate a life. to celebrate the good times that we had, the smiles that we've had, the good times together. And those are the things that I think Dad would want us to all remember. The joy and the happiness. Relationships, family, brothers and sisters, outlaws and in-laws. That's what he enjoyed. And my dad, over the last several years, really had trouble hearing. And it was sometimes difficult for him to hear what was going on at a mass or hear what was going on at a funeral service. But I've been years now that he can hear clearly. I'll bet he and his brothers are reminiscing, having a good time. And his sisters, his parents. We'll see him again one day. He'll probably be telling stories about things that happened 60 years ago, that none of us can remember. He'll be talking about the fun he had with his brothers. He'll be talking again about how much his sisters did around the house and how much work they did and how many miles they walked to school in the snow and all those other crazy things. In a little while we're going to have an opportunity. Some of you guys may remember some of those stories. Maybe we can laugh again and celebrate what was Dad's life and the good things that he left with all of us. And that's what life is all about. And this particular weekend, as we go to church on Sunday and celebrate the resurrection of Jesus, and that's what really makes it. That's what's important.
If I could get a handle on a few things I wanted to say, maybe I'll be all right, but I don't know. I'm just going to kind of ramble off here a few things that Brother Walt and I went through. The goods and bads. Don't forgive one another, and sometimes fights we had, all part of growing up. Being a brother and sister from a large family, we got a lot going for us. I like to tell one what I call a rabbit story. We were kids, weather was bitter cold. Daddy had an old single barrel shotgun, he called it the spray pump. So, neighbor down the way, they had an old barn, and it was a haven for rabbits in the wintertime. They'd come out in the snow and make a lot of tracks, but you'd never catch one of them out, or rarely. The weather changed around to where it's advantageous, I guess, for them to come out. So Dad suggested we'd go down there and he might find a few rabbits sitting out. So we go down there and it was cold. He had a mitten on. I said, when this rabbit runs out, I'll holler, mitten, mitten, you pull off. I'm going to shoot the rabbit. Now we hunted and hunted around, finally took off out into the meadow. Sure enough, here's the rabbit. About that time he jumps up and he hollers, mitten, mitten, mitten. I said, shoot him, shoot him, shoot him. And the rabbit run under the barn. To say I was in poor standing on the way home, would you understand? Also, that didn't go well for his dad. He got to pick out that story. He got to telling it to the neighbors, but I oftentimes think that Brother Walt and I, some of the things that we went through, and husked corn together, and milked cows together, and went hunting together, and church together. He was always wanting to stand out. He was a little smarter than the rest of us. Up here, he could figure out equations and so forth much better than any of us brothers or sisters I can recall. He used to help me with some problems at home. I'd have some schoolwork. He'd figure up in his head. I'd work around with a pencil, I'd get close to it, and he'd tell me in advance what it was. That's how smart he was. He had an incredible memory on things that happened 20, 30 years back that you could hardly remember. 1936, we done this and that, remember so-and-so, and we used to get a kick out of listening to some of those things. Going over to visit him not long ago, I recall some of those things when we brought him up. It's incredible how he could remember things of 20, 30, 40, even 50 years ago. Yet a few hours or a few days or something before, it just didn't strike a note. It's a strange thing how this mind of ours can twist these things around and how it can be so complicated. But he was always glad to see me. I could be 15, 20 feet from him and his eyes would light up. Hi, Cam, he'd say. He was always very glad to see me. So I just had a few thoughts here. I thought I'd ramble along. There's a brother there from a large family. We never had much, but we appreciated by gosh what we had. I guess that's about all I got to say. Thank you.
A lot of you probably know that at one time in our backyard there was a baseball field. We had a pitcher's mound and a backstop, second to none down. And Dad built this ball diamond. Well, it wasn't quite a ball diamond. A modern baseball diamond would have flat, bare ground. Well, here at that, we had to have regular grass with no base paths, as we know today. But hour after hour after hour, he'd hit balls to us and play catch. I think a better ball player. I think it's what he wanted to do. I think one of the stories I heard, of course, his mind just wasn't quite what it used to be, but apparently he had some ambitions in playing professional ball because he got to tell the nurses at the nursing home, again, keep in mind, he wasn't quite all there, that he played semi-pro ball for the St. Louis Browns. Well, we know he never did, but I think he imagined him or fancied himself as a ball player. I guess I'll never forget all those hours that he spent hitting balls and pitching tools. I think that's what he would like the boys to have been professional ball players. Now we never even got past Pony League out there. So. But I've got a lot of good memories of it. So, thanks, Dad.
In keeping with the levity of the evening and the stories about Mr. Kuhlman, he had a lifelong penchant for heavy automobiles, that I recall. And he would have none of the imports or smaller cars because he said that they were unsafe. And John and I were skeptical of his views and always told him they're too heavy, they use too much gas. And this had gone on to John and I had turned driving age at 16, and the man would rail about the evils of these small cars and how they were not safe, and his Buicks and Oldsmobiles were the sturdiest thing, and I'm sure he was thinking of safety in a different way than John and I were. Because one night, when John and I went astray on the other side of the town, we ran into a couple of ladies our age who already had boyfriends. And the boyfriends pulled up. John and I were left floundering and ran into the old heavy car, the Buick or the Olds, whichever it was, and headed until gas would take us no more, completely out of town into a different county. So I think Mr. Kuhlman was right, the car was indeed safe, although I'm not sure that that's what he meant by it.
Yeah, I just wanted to say a little bit more about some of the stories that he used to talk about when he was growing up. And well, there's I don't know how many hundreds of times we hear something about, well, what would Gus and Lem think? Gus and Lem were a couple of neighbors from the old homestead, And one of the characters that made a big impression on me was Bill Dorner. Those of you who remember Bill, Dad was great at doing impressions of these people, and he'd talk about Bill. There's you gets and you goes and you why, and it just take Bill forever to get his point across. But it was just great listening to Dad tell those stories. And I came along quite a bit after the older brothers and sisters, and by the time I got to be baseball playing age, we had moved away from the house where we had the baseball field. I do remember it, but I was about 6 when we moved out of there. But I remember when I was in Little League and then later in Pony League, Dad had come home from a full day at work, and by this time he was, in his early 50s, and he was working a lot of times. He'd worked at a gas station. He'd come home from work all day long. He's 52, 53, and he'd come home and he'd throw me batting practice before every game, and just to make me that little bit better for that game that night. And it hit me a couple of years ago, all that work, just to help me out a little bit. But he also had nicknames for all of us kids. Within I don't know how long it took him to come up with the nicknames, but there's Daddy's Little Angel and Jughead, Cheeky Morphosis, and Maggie was Whittle Mai, and his Kunst, because Kathy reminded him of some, I guess, ornery relations, and I was always Peach to him. Even a couple of weeks ago, Mom said that she said something to him about something I had done, and he looked at her and said, "Poor Peach." But
Just a quick note or two. I guess there was, you had a chicken farm or something like that back in the old days. And as I grew older, and I'd heard that story about the chicken and taking the eggs to market and there being bumps on the road or something like that. I guess Grandpa used to, announce as we get close to some bumps or whatever it was. He'd tell the boys who were in the back, he said, "Eggs." You remember that? Maybe there was a wild story he always told us. But it was one of his favorite stories. And last time I told that story, I think, was one time when I was taking my oldest son on his first date, and he was double dating with a friend of his, and they were in 9th grade going to high school dance or something like that. And they weren't talking. Nothing was said in the car, and I couldn't stand it. So I told them the old eggs story. So then they started talking. They didn't want to hear any more stories. But Dad always, he really left a foundation for us kids. And in his times that he worked at Marathon, and then there was a change in jobs. He went and worked at the main office, and he worked in the sanatorial crew or the janitorial crew or whatever it was. And I think the people at Marathon thought maybe he might quit and not do that, but he had the fortitude and the desire to provide for his family, and he had the gumption, to do what was best. And there was a time when I learned what was really important. He cared about his family. He cared about the best he could do at the time for his family, and he cared about his brothers and sisters. And the stories that we heard, were a lot of wild stories, but there was always a common thread through them, that he really loved the times that he was with his brothers and his sisters. He loved the time that he was on the farm. He acknowledged that it was very hard. It was a struggle at times with such a large family and so many things being required of each of them. But he was able to pass that commitment on to his children and his grandchildren, and we're all the better for it.
You know, Aunt Jill, they've been talking about how he loved the boys, his brothers, but I was talking to Mom today, and Mom said she remembers when you lived above the home market, and Walt was beating you, and how he would hurry up to the front of the door, shine his shoes up and went to the window, and had that sparkle in his eye, and he'd run upstairs, and you'd take off together, and just that love just grew and grew. I want you to know that.
I just wanted to add one thing. I'd like to sort of publicly acknowledge somebody from the parish here who was the father of somebody that I knew from St. Mine's. Actually, his son was a year or two ahead of me in school, but it's Ed Romatowski, who was, among other things, was Dad's catcher in softball. And I just wanted to thank Mr. Romatowski because something he said 14 years ago or so. I was finishing up in college and I was working at Loggers Carpet, and Mr. Romatowski came in one day, and at that point I just knew him as Mr. Romatowski. I didn't know he knew Dad pretty well, but he came in and we were talking for a little while, and he said, "Oh, Coleman, which Coleman are you?" And I said, "Walt Coleman's son." And at this time, I just, to give you a little background, I was 23 years old. I just sort of at the tail end of my more rebellious years, and thinking that anybody who was over 25 or 30 was, they didn't know anything. And Mr. Romatowski said, "Oh, Walt Coleman, he was a nice guy, just a really super nice guy, and real honest, and never fooled around, and he's just never made fun of people, just a really truly nice gentleman." And when I was at that age, I was still sort of thinking of Dad as Dad, and I never really thought of him as he could be a nice guy, he could just be a nice person. And it was really from that point on, just from what Mr. Romatowski said, that got me to thinking about it, and I did from that point on start to get closer to Dad. And I am very happy to say that I think I got to say everything I ever wanted to say to Dad. And I guess I'd always just encourage everybody out there, if you got something to say to somebody, say it to them. And but thanks again to Mr. Romatowski.
Please bear with me, I hate public speaking and I'm shaking in my boots. I'm his granddaughter, and I just wanted to say something for the grandchildren. I'm one of 17, and that really seems like a lot to me. So I didn't really feel like I could be very, very, very close to my grandfather, but he always knew a little something about each and every one of us, and I just so happened to be the runner of the grandchildren. And first thing he would say to me a lot of times, and I still remember the look on his face, was, "How's learning coming along, Winnie?" And, "You still fast?" And I guess the one thing that I will never forget about him is that he always wanted to race me. And he'd go get his running shoes on, and we'd go have a race out in front. And he'd always push me a little bit, but he always let me win, too. And that's it. Well, like Wendy, I don't like to talk in front of groups either, but I am his oldest granddaughter, and I remember every time, even when I was a teenager, every time I come over, "How much do you weigh? How tall are you?" And he'd take me into his bedroom and put me on the scales every time. I would always say, I don't know, every time. That's what he'd do. And he always, before he was diabetic, he would chew double-neck gum, and he'd give me a piece and I'd sit on his lap and he'd tell me the same stories over and over again. I remember the gum, and he just always wanted to know how tall I was and how much I weighed. It was every time.
I thought for sure we were going to get an update on how tall she was and how much she weighed. I was a little bit nervous with that first, that rabbit story. In this time of the Easter Bunny, I thought I was going to have an unhappy ending, but I was very much relieved now that came out. And I could also relate to the way Walt's face would light up when he would greet you. And couple, when I would visit both Walt and Joanne, one of the videotapes that you had, I think when Peach was in one of his plays, probably up New England ways, I caught a little bit of that, and I used to get regular updates on Richard's progress up until 2 years ago. So, but I thank you to all of you who did share, and it is that richness because we both we come together as Walt's family and friends, but also as his family of faith. And the ritual of the church helps us to express our mourning and our grief, but also, as Richard mentioned, to express our gratitude, our gratefulness for the gift of Walt's life, and our faith and joy because of the promise of resurrection and eternal life that Jesus gives to us. And so, before we go our separate ways, we take leave of our brother Walt. May our farewell express our affection for him. May it ease our sadness and strengthen our hope. One day we shall joyfully greet him again, when the love of Christ, which conquers all things, destroys even death itself.
Say something profound. Oh, he did it.